Hello and welcome to the Blue Collar Wealth Club podcast. I am your host, Jerry Garcia. We got a special guest on today. We have Brian O'Neill. He's going to come on and kind of talk to us a little bit about his background in general contracting into starting his own business and then kind of his journey into the investing world. So welcome, Brian.
Thanks, Jerry. It's good being on.
Awesome. So you run a company right now called Passive Capital Partners, correct?
Yeah, actually I have O'Neill Development as well. It's something I've started up. Haven't done much with it yet, but kind of dipping my toes back into the construction development arena around the Utah area. So that'll be a future project, I think. But for right now, I've mostly focused on passive capital.
Very cool. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Tell us about your background in construction and getting into that business and then working your way, and we'll kind of just take it from there.
Yeah. So I always liked building things even as a kid. I was building forts, and in high school they didn't have shops, but they had the theater department where you could build things. So I was doing that. So I figured I actually went to school for computer science and engineering because I also was kind of a computer geek, and I hated it. I absolutely hated it. I loved the task, but the people and being stuck in a basement on Friday night and just wasn't my world. So I ended up getting a degree in construction management, which I'd never even heard of, which is sort of like architecture and business and engineering mixed together. And went and worked for a national home builder, and that was 2007, I think. And we all know what happened around 2008. So I was the last guy hired, and it shrunk by about 2/3, and I was still employed there somehow. And I was like, this ship is going down. I got to get off of this. And I had, my dad was building a second home on the coast in Oregon, and we wanted to do some home automation lighting control as a system called Lutron. And there was no vendors there that were installing it. So I was like, this sucks. They won't sell it to me because I'm just the end user. So I literally made a fake company called Link Systems. And I rented one of those Regis offices for an hour that has the fake secretary and the boardroom, make you look sort of legit, and got the vendor to go there. And I convinced him that I was a real company and I was just starting out to give me a vendor account. And I just needed it for my dad's house. So we ended up doing my dad's house and then someone else's house. And that's why I sort of realized hey, this company I'm working for is going down. I just jumped ship and just literally started this company called Link Systems that was really just a joke, and went through the housing crash. And we focused on people that were buying short sales and people that were remodeling their houses. And there was just a little niche market, and all our competition was really big and fat and bloated and heavy from the big run up to the housing crash. So we were able to sort of bite into some of their market and beat them as a scrappy startup. That was home automation before the iPad was out and before Alexa and all those types of things. So we focused on kind of high-end homes. There's a lot of money from the Bay Area. This is in California, that goes up to an area called Truckee and Tahoe. So we kind of started focusing up there. And I grew that company for 10 years. And then I also starting a few restaurants, and I had that company for 15 years until I ended up moving. And that's the only reason I stopped running it. But it went from me crawling through attics and pulling wire and hiring a buddy to help me out, and finally got an install van. And then it was kind of crazy. I was working during the day and doing bids at night and doing the typical owner operator. Ended up growing it larger. I can tell a story about growing it and shrinking it and the struggles with that company as well. But that's sort of where I got to everything until 2.5 years ago. I sold everything because I was moving out of California and sort of had a chance to reset life and reevaluate what I liked about my last careers and what I didn't. So
that's great. I think the majority of blue-collar business owners get started. You start off doing the work. In your case, might be a little bit different because of that housing crash, but taking that and branching off and just kind of winging it. I mean, trying to find those contracts and get into those larger businesses. Getting into the luxury market, was that just by happenstance, or did you have some connections there?
I would say it was probably both. I had some connections and just from family relations and some of the first projects we did. It's hard to get into the luxury side because you need more capital because you're doing much larger projects. You have a lot more cash flow things you have to deal with. A lot of the vendor accounts that you need for the products you need for luxury, they're more restrictive. So they want to see you have history and you have a real company and you've been around a while before they give you access to these products. They don't want we call them trunk slammers, guys that just work out of the trunk of their car or the back of their truck, installing these luxury products because they find that the client experience isn't as good. So it took me a while to get there. And it's funny, when I first started my company, that's what I was running into, was builders asking how long you've been around. Do you have a showroom? Because showrooms were a big thing before the housing crash. So I was like, oh, I don't have a showroom. So I literally went $70,000 in debt, sold all my stocks, borrowed money from my mom to lease this showroom and build it out and buy all this product that goes in there. I had it for 3 years and 2 clients ever came to it. And I spent all this money on these marketing materials. We had all these sales brochures that I went to like the BMW and Mercedes dealerships and got their brochures and went to a graphics guy. Like, I want my stuff to look like this, which of course is insanely expensive. They're like $12 brochure or something.
Yeah.
Just to try to make myself look legitimate. That's what I thought I needed to do. And it was more of a self-confidence thing than anything. Like, I didn't want to be questioned, so I started doing what I thought I needed, when really it didn't help at all. It's just a big waste of money. And trusting salespeople that try to sell you marketing, but ended up getting rid of that showroom, and obviously didn't need it during the housing crash, and just went to a flex space warehouse and never went back. The closest thing I had to a showroom after that was my house. I have a nice house down in a nice suburb, and we sort of outfitted everything in this house. So if anyone wanted to see our products in action, instead of bring them to a client's house, we just literally bring them to my house. I would pay a housekeeper to come through the day before and just make it look pretty. And a few people came there, but really they just wanted to know you were legit. They didn't actually want to go there.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point. With the want to be like, to look like that luxury brand, I think that's easy to get caught up in. Oh, we need to have a fancy website. We need to have, everything you think has to be squared, when in reality, you can convince people you're legit in other ways without spending all that money. That's really good insight.
Yeah, so, I ended up just talking to the luxury builders, getting a few that actually give you meetings, let you bid on it. We even bid on things we knew we weren't going to get to start the process of them seeing our names. Our bids were beautiful. We put a lot of time to make sure that they were extremely detailed and pretty, and we had special software we used that we put a lot of time in. I think that started to help. They just saw our attention to detail, and then we got a few, and then take great pictures and do a good job, and then you start to leverage that. But a lot of it has to do with your confidence. Like, I did the sales for years. I think for 8 or 9 of the first years, I was the salesman, basically. And it started to get down to my confidence in walking into these sites, and they could feel that. I knew what I was doing. I was confident. I didn't feel like I was out of place. I knew what I was doing in the first few years, but I just felt out of place. I'm always very critical on myself. They could feel that until I would finally be able to just walk into a site and just be, yep, I know what I'm doing. What do we need to do? And I think that changed things a lot.
That's a great point. That self-confidence and that self-doubt really shows through in the little things. I used to say when I first started in mortgage, I felt like I kind of knew the basics, but I always felt like somebody was going to come at me and question whether I knew what I was. Yeah, exactly. And I personally, when I said I felt confident as a loan officer, the first time I was able to kind of tell somebody that I wasn't 100% certain on that answer, but I was going to go figure it out for them without feeling like they were going to turn me away for that reason. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sometimes that confidence just being like, hey, look, I don't want to give you false information. Let me just double check my information before I give you an answer on that, and not feel like you were going to lose that client for that reason. Those are the key things. That money's much better spent, like you said, doing those little things, building that confidence in other ways, and just a lot more efficient way to spend money than to build out an entire showroom that gets visited twice. So
yeah, I started just buying the products for myself. I get the demo deals and stuff and just put them in my house, live with them, play with them, try to break them. Then I had more reality when people would bring up these. In that industry, there's like a do-it-yourself version of products, and there's the professional, and you'd always get questioned of what's the difference. And I finally just started buying the do-it-yourself stuff. And like, they say it's great, and then I play with it like, oh, okay, here's what this is used for. Here's where it's good. Here's where it isn't. And then I had more confidence of why they should spend more with us. As opposed to just
beautiful.
What the salesman told me when he told me we should use these products.
He's selling you. That's excellent. And then you have real world experience where you can go out and say, hey, look, I wondered the same thing you wondered. So I bought some of this and I put it here and I left it there for a while. And you see how this product wears in comparison to the more expensive product, right?
Yeah.
And you have examples you can give.
Yeah, instead of just bad mouthing it, I always had what I call a consultative sales approach. I never really wanted to sell. I just, like, if this was me, being the number one line I would use when I knew I had their confidence and trust I would always say, if this was my house, this is what I would do. Or if this was my house and I was in your situation, and they would know I was not selling them something I wanted them to have, but what I thought was appropriate. So I'd tell them like, hey, this product's great for this. If you're going to do that, use this product. Like, don't buy mine. The best way I found to sell was to tell them not to buy something. And I was honest. Like some people would they're 65 years old. He can barely use his iPhone. He doesn't respond to emails well. Yeah, he wants a full home automation system. Like, you're going to hate this thing. And also, you're going to call me constantly not knowing how to use it. Like, I would talk you out of doing that. Let's go a simpler route. Like, yeah, I'm going to make less money, but you're going to be happy. And that's really what it was a huge referral business. You don't want mad clients. And we had a long-term maintenance thing where we had to stick with them. Like a plumber, electrician, you build the house and you're kind of gone, basically. Unless something goes wrong initially, like they're going to call someone else for maintenance. They always called us for any upgrades, maintenance issues. We kind of own that client. We were one of the few people that owned the client after the house was done. We had a different approach to things.
That was always my sales approach too. When I did retail sales for a long time at Circuit City, so I'll show my age a bit there. I worked in the car audio department, and that's mostly luxury stuff, right? Unless you need a stereo or your speakers are blown, you're really just upgrading things because that's what you want. Mm-hmm. But that was always the sales approach I took. Sure, you could buy this, but do you really need that? Are you really going to hear the difference between this and this? Probably not. The second you tell somebody not to buy something, it instantly builds that credibility so much, especially if you're talking them out of something more expensive into something that's more suited for what they actually need. And that's because it just shows that you're not trying to sell the most expensive thing. There's anything me as a consumer, I'm instantly turned off the second I feel like somebody's only trying to sell me the most expensive product because they can, or they think I can afford it.
And once I finally started reading some marketing books and sales books, the whole good, better, best thing. A lot of major brands will use the good, better, best, and it's for a reason. And they finally explained what the reason was. Like, we had products that internally, they were pretty similar. Or a good example, my dad's a dentist. Electric toothbrushes. I went to a convention with them once when I was a kid. And like the insides of electric toothbrushes are almost always the exact same motor, the exact same everything. But the housing, the look, the packaging, the electronic features on it, that's what differs a lot of the same brand, like an Oral-B or something like that. And they market them as good, better, best. And like we had a lighting product that had a good, better, best. It's because there's people that they just want to buy the value one. And that's what they're going to look for. You need a product for them. And there's people that they want the best one, but they always take one step down from the best. Like that's how they purchase in life, whether it's going to be a car or a product. They'll always like want the top one. They kind of like, okay, I'll sacrifice down one. So there's always needs to be a better product. And there's people like my dad who will always buy the top one just because it's the top one. And it's that he just wants to own the top one. He's not going to use the 4,000 PSI pressure washer that's made for commercial use, but he just buys that one because, well, it's better and it's not that much more, and he will. And once I realized that, you can start to see that in customers when you're talking to them. And the people like my dad, you actually do them a disservice if you don't offer them the best one, because they actually want a reason to buy it. They feel better when they buy the top one. And that's what was interesting with me when I started selling things. We sold speakers for houses and things like that. And there's people that wanted you to tell them about the best one and the little differences of how they're better. And they're willing to pay a lot more for that little difference. Just like a Toyota versus a Lexus. Look at actual parts, Toyotas and Lexuses, the top end Toyotas are almost exactly like the Lexus. There's just a little bit difference. And people will pay 10, 15 grand for that little difference. And they're happy to. So that's an interesting sales thing to take. And you'll see it everywhere. Once you start realizing it, you see it everywhere. You see it on Apple products. You see it everywhere.
When you see that's those people who like to buy the highest end stuff, right? They like to describe those little differences to their friends or whoever they're talking to and showing off to. Those little differences that you give them, they then feedback. No, that's an excellent point on the the good, better, best. That's how coaches are taught to sell. That's how pretty much everyone is taught to sell these days, by offering that. Because a lot of people, like you said, the majority of people will buy that better. Most people don't want to buy the cheapest because they either feel cheap or they think it's just not as good. And a lot of people don't want to buy the best because they feel like they're just paying extra for things they don't need. So that better is where you're going to find, it's like a bell curve. You're going to find the majority of buyers. So let's talk a little bit about then how you got from that business into your new business and what you're doing now.
There's a quick transition between those two where I got really discouraged after 10 years of being an owner operator. And I read the E-Myth book about the entrepreneur myth, about how you need to work yourself out of a job and set up systems and manage the business instead of being in it. So I really worked hard on that, and I started to hire people. I hired 2 salespeople. I had 3 install crews. I had a bookkeeper. Like really grew the company. And it was stressful because now I needed a lot more revenue to cover all these people. And the systems really had to be right. And I did an okay job at it, but I really didn't make any more money. I had more time, I guess. But I ended up realizing that 80% of my jobs were paying just to cover the staff and all this overhead. And my profit, the most profitable jobs, were really about 20, the whole 80-20 rule. 20% of the jobs, I could just do those with a small crew and make more money. That's what I realized. So I ended up kind of getting discouraged and shrinking back down to that mentality. And I had a buddy who was going to franchise some restaurants. And I had turned 35. I said I was going to save money for a stupid car like a Aston Martin. And I had the money in the bank account. And instead of buying the car, I decided to invest it in his first startup of this franchise, which was a restaurant. Anyways, the goal for that was I knew I couldn't run a restaurant, like be involved in it. I could only do the business side of it. So I was really trying to get out of that and looking for another opportunity, like a franchise. Franchise people, that's a system where you're not running it as an owner. Got into restaurants, ended up working those things like an owner-operator again, bought a second restaurant. And that's actually the closest I got to being a true owner, where I didn't barely have keys to the place. Like the managers ran it. They did all the numbers. I didn't know how to use the point of sale system. The accountant and the bookkeepers did the books. I just confirmed them and read reports. And then COVID hit. Actually, before that, we decided we were going to leave California because we had kids and it just wasn't working for us. We wanted a different state. So we put everything up for sale. They were all in escrow and we were going to sell them all. We had buyers and we were out. Like we did it. We were going to sell all these things and move and make some good money. And then COVID hit and all the buyers backed out. And I had to then dive back into the businesses in California, owning restaurants and a construction company. And weather those 2 years trying to figure out how do we go from thought we have a nice sizable exit to we're going bankrupt. We ended up making through it. It's a whole other story for a different episode of what it took to do that. But basically just never gave up. Just never gave up. Like we're going to go down fighting. We'll go down fighting to our last dollar instead of just sitting and wondering. And that was actually, I learned the most about business in those 2 years. In my mind, I had nothing to lose. Like I was already going to lose everything. So we might as well try everything. And that actually is what made things work out well. We ended up selling those businesses for 3 times as much as we were originally going to sell them for because of that. Because all the innovation and the changes that happened during COVID allowed us to be way more efficient, better structure systems, and actually more profitable. So I sold them all, moved, and I told myself I was going to spend 6 months not working, just relax, like look back on what I like about business, what didn't I like about it, what do I want to do going forward. At one point, I almost had 100 employees. And that was probably the most stressful part of things. It wasn't the business, wasn't customers, wasn't sales. It was how do you manage employees and all the things in their life they bring into work and leading them and motivating them and trying to avoid drama. In restaurants, there's lots of drama. It's an interesting employee base. And then, so I spent about 3 months and I started getting the itch and we started getting all the checks for the sales of these businesses. And I was like, what do I do with this? Like, I don't feel qualified. Like my retirement accounts maybe had a few $100,000 in them at that point, but they didn't have like 7 figures in them. And that's what we were working with after we sold these companies. So I started cruising around and going to conferences. And I think, of course, Facebook and social media knew I was looking. I started getting ads to conferences. So I started going to real estate conferences. My original plan was to either start another restaurant, start another construction company. And then I started looking at franchises like, hey, maybe I'll buy a bunch of Ace Hardwares or something. Something else I was interested in was more of a set system. And then I realized like I'm stepping back into the same thing, like one step better because I'm buying a system. But I'm still, a lot of those businesses are still owner-operator. Started investing my money and I was doing oil and gas and some real estate and multifamily and just meeting the people that run them. I realized a lot of things I like about business, which is numbers and like the back end. I always like being the guy behind the business. I don't like being the face, the sales guy. I had to do sales, but I'd much rather be the numbers, operations, efficiency, how things work type guy. So a lot of the general partners on multifamily and these apartment deals and their self-storage had a lot of the things I'm really good at. And I was really looking for what business can I do that has the least number of employees? And that sounds bad, but I knew my strength wasn't like leading large teams. Maybe it was. I mean, people stuck around with me, but it's hard. It's really hard. It's a very outwardly, like I'm very introverted and I feel like you can be introverted and lead teams, but at least for the industries I was in, extroverts did better. I usually hired extroverts to be my managers. I just want to get the work done. Like, come on, come to work, do a good job, let's go home. Need a lot more than that. I started transitioning, investing passively, and then started being a general partner and dipping my toes into the operations side. Because I thought my background in construction and business, once I started looking into these things, people think, or I thought, like it's a building. I didn't really connect the business side of it. Like, okay, I know there's a business behind it, but really it's the exact opposite. Especially now, you see who has good operations and who don't. It's not about the quality of their building. Like, if you have maintenance issues on some building and one that doesn't, that's not going to make or break that project and that investment. It's really the operations people, how well they're doing sales, how well they're pricing to the market, know their customers, their operations work well with their maintenance teams, accounting, leading their on-site staff. A lot of the analysis that goes on with numbers and books and profit and losses and cash flow, it's just another business. Like, when I start looking at it, it's exactly the same. Yeah, they're not selling a product, they're selling an apartment. There's still income coming in, there's losses that happen, there's efficiencies in your sales, there's turnover you're trying to manage. It's just like another business. It's just a different aspect of it. Like, when I went from construction to restaurants, in construction, I was trying to be most efficient with my wire usage and waste. And my guys would pull, 6 miles of wire in a house. If they cut off 20 feet for every run they overran, that's a cost that adds up over the year. Just like when we buy the wrong type of napkins and customers use more napkins, like, I save like $5,000 a year in napkins because we changed the type of napkin we used. It's the same thing. Like, it's no different than when you go into apartments and you're looking at these little details of where you're buying paint from and how many days is it taking to flip a project. So I got really interested in that because I really saw that there's a business behind it and that it's applicable. It's not, they use all these terms. I think real estate uses a lot of terms that make it sound complex. Well, the NOI and the loss to lease and all these things, and it sounds like once you get down to what that actually means in the business, it's just a fancy word for something we business owners already know.
I think it's interesting, right? Because people think of a hotel as a business, and really a hotel is no different than an apartment complex or an apartment building.
Just shorter leases.
Yeah, exactly. You're talking nightly leases versus monthly or annual leases. That's one of the things I find fascinating too, especially getting more into the business side of things. Because I came the opposite way. I went from mortgage into learning about investing and thinking single family into multifamily, and then more onto the small business side of things. And that's where you really see exactly what you said. The operations, the efficiencies, it's all the same, different terminology.
I did yearly budgets for my business, and then every quarter we would check in to see where we were, if we were behind or ahead, and it would motivate us to either change our perspective or know our budget was off. Apartments do the exact same thing. So it's just having that back knowledge as a business owner, any business owner listening to this, you have an advantage. Like, you think you don't because you don't know the big numbers and the loans and all these different terms. But once these people get into it and they buy these properties, that's what they're dealing with for 5 to 10 years. Like, depending on how long they're holding it, it's that business side of things, insurance, making sure your coverage is good, and all those things. If you've been in business long enough, you've ran into having a bad insurance policy and it not covering you, or vendors screwing you over and not getting the best price and things like that. They deal with the same exact thing in apartments.
So tell us what you're working with Passive Capital Partners.
Passive right now, we mostly do apartment complexes in Tennessee right now. Excuse me, Tennessee. I'm looking in Tennessee, but Dallas is where we've done. I'm also looking in Salt Lake City because that's in my backyard. It's a different market here, so if something comes up, it will. Right now, there's a lot of new supply. They hold properties a little different here, and there's a different type of money, and what they pay for per door versus NOI is kind of interesting out here, but still looking. Also for a personal project, I'm looking at some development deals, land development in Utah, because Utah's a big state. There's only certain areas they actually build in, and a lot of the land is sort of held generationally, I guess you would say. There's a lot of family money here that really holds on to things. So it's an interesting land development place. Also, they have water right things. There's a lot of water needs that you have to do land development. So we're playing in that arena as well. And then just continuing to raise and do deals on apartments. Just watching the market and finding good C plus with a certain demographic as well. Like, not all C's are the same. Obviously, my construction background always concerns me about the plumbing and the age and roofs and things once you get into C's, but there's good ones out there. And then the demographic in C's, you can learn a lot by looking at a rent roll and visiting the property, because you can have two exact properties with totally different demographics. And some will have a lot of delinquency and some will have almost none. And it's kind of interesting.
Sure. You're talking about different markets. I mean, I'm sure you have deals that would pencil in Dallas or Tennessee that don't pencil at all in Utah because of the difference in market.
Yeah, Utah changed a little bit during the last COVID thing, because a bunch of people moved here and a lot of building, and it was a cheaper market, but things have changed. So it'll be interesting to see. It's still a great market, great economy, a young population, a growing population. It's got a lot of good things about it. It's very stable. It's got a great economy. The government's pro-business. They're not in debt. They run things efficiently here. There's just high cost per door.
Yeah, just a different type of deal you're looking for there. There was a lot of insight into the similarities in the real estate world and the business world. I think more than people realize. So
yeah, like for business owners, we were talking about this offline. Like the numbers sound big, like $1 million or $10 million or $20 million, but it's just like when you started your business, like we were talking about. When you first start your business, you're looking at every $1,000, like $1,000 decision, and then it's $5,000, and then you start to make $10,000 decisions, and then you're making, should I buy a new vehicle at the end of this year? Now you're in $50,000 or $100,000 decisions, and then next thing you know, you're looking at buying a building or something for your business. It's the exact same thing with real estate. You can step in wherever you want, but it might be doing a duplex, or it might be doing an 8-plex or a little self-storage facility, or you step up into the big $1 million number stuff. It's bigger and it's scarier. You got to make sure your numbers are right. Business owners are really well suited for that transition. And honestly, almost every person I've come across that does apartment complexes or big real estate, they didn't start there. They came from something else and they worked their way up in that industry to where bigger numbers weren't as scary, and they transitioned over to these big apartment complexes. Almost everyone I meet that does apartment complexes started with single families. Almost everyone. Right. I mean, there's a few like me that like did businesses and kind of worked up their backbone to dealing with big numbers, but almost everyone.
That's like you said, even on the business side, right? You don't usually start out by doing the big, massive jobs first thing. You usually start off on the small, efficient jobs and then work your way up to those massive deals. And we talked about that a little bit offline too. Sometimes you get more efficiency on the smaller run-of-the-mill jobs than you do on the big ones that you use in your magazine ads or Facebook ads. You know what I mean?
You can get super efficient at the small ones, or I think we went after the bigger ones that were not as straightforward, that people kind of like, I don't know if I want to deal with that. And we were willing to deal with it, but we put a profit margin on top of it. So that's how we made our money.
That's the price you pay, right? If you're doing something out of the ordinary, there's a premium on that. I mean, and that's the reality. And the reality is because exactly like you said, it's going to take, you're going to have a lot of more unknowns, and you have to put a profit on top of that to make sure that you're planning ahead for that.
And it was bigger, but we were willing to deal with it. We had the cash flow to deal with it. And that's how we kind of got these bigger, more complex jobs. It wasn't straightforward, but we just priced it in knowing like, we might be off by 30% on labor. So we're going to probably bump labor by 30% just in case. And then when we get into it, we find that we can do it more efficiently, and it's all gravy if it works out well. And if it's not, we still have a profitable job.
Yeah, exactly. You got to plan for the worst case scenario, and then if you're able to make it work easier, even better, right? That extra profit on top, but it's not like you did it to overcharge the customer. You did it because there was the possibility that you needed that in the end.
If it worked out, like then when change orders came up or other things came up, like we knew we could go above and beyond to be able to like make that customer like super happy. So we're the ones that didn't change or showed up extra or whatever it was. It wasn't that stress. Sure. I think people get into trouble in construction. They go after bigger jobs. They bid them based on the best case scenario, and they get into it and things start going wrong. And now they're stressed because they're not making money or they're losing money. They're not able to handle that type of cash flow where they got to put out 50 grand or 100 grand or a few hundred grand, maybe not get paid back for a few months. And they're just, then they start cutting corners and being defensive and stuff, and it just all goes downhill.
Well, and that's it. I mean, like I said, if you plan it like you did, where you have that premium on top and something comes up, but it's small enough that you can just, hey, look, you know what? We have to do this. It's a little bit extra. We're just going to take that cost on ourselves, right? And now you have a client who's super happy and is going to refer you to everybody because they felt like you took good care of them instead of charging them whatever that extra may have been because you had already built in some expectancy for that kind of situation.
Yeah. I hate change orders. As a subcontractor, I hate giving them. I hate asking for them. So I just try to do whatever I could not to, basically.
Well, yeah, and it comes back to the sales tactics we're talking about, right? You could try to be the cheapest, or you could just try to be the most forward with what you're selling. And so you say, hey, look, this is what it's going to cost. And if you lose a couple jobs because of that, great. But you end up saving your reputation in the long run by not being that person who's constantly coming back with change orders and hurting your reviews in the long run. Well, one thing I like to always ask toward the end of a podcast is about a book that you are read or are reading, it sounds like. And what kind of value we can get out of that book.
Yeah, so I'm in the middle of a book called The Road Less Stupid, and it was recommended to me on Audible. I was like, that's an interesting title. So I started looking into it, and it basically comes down to, and I'll probably butcher the quote of how the guy describes it, but it basically is, you don't have to make more smart decisions, you have to make less stupid decisions. And I thought that really resonated with me, and it was interesting. One of his other quotes was, if I could let you change 3 financial decisions in your life, how much money would you save? It's interesting. It makes you look back on 3 decisions, and anyone you ask that to, the number will always be positive because you make dumb decisions. So it basically goes through like how to not make dumb decisions, how to not use emotion, how not to be too optimistic about, if you're optimistic about something working out, that's a clue that you might be missing something. And he also has a quote is, what am I not seeing? He constantly asks himself, what am I not seeing? I'm only a third way through the book, but it's a really good book, and I would totally read it. He has little thinking sessions, he calls. So every chapter, he has questions to pose. You kind of sit in a quiet room and think about these different questions, whatever issue you're dealing with. And it really kind of directs your mind to break down some of the decisions you're making. Because like he said, looking back, it's your stupid decisions that hurt you more than your smart decisions help you. You can have a great idea and then some stupid decision behind it, and it's a total train wreck. It was just a good perspective. I thought everything he talks about relates to business and just finance in general, of how you make decisions and try to not make so many stupid ones. So I definitely recommend it.
Perfect. I will add that to my list because that's a new one to me also. Well, awesome, Brian. Really appreciate you coming on today. I think we got a lot of value out of a lot of the stories. We'll definitely have you back. I do want to delve more into the COVID restaurant business because I'm sure that has a bunch of stories within stories itself. So
yeah, it's a good story. It goes into politics a little bit, but just how to survive, honestly. Like just how to survive, make decisions that are like hard.
Your business model based on the current circumstances, and I think that's invaluable.
And not following the trend. There's some stories in there about not following the trend. If I would have followed the trend, we had been out of business.
Well, thanks for coming on. We'll definitely have you back on, and I guess until next time.
Thanks, Jerry. Appreciate it.
Thank you.